George Russell is not just angry anymore. He has become the face of a driver revolt. Because after Monaco, the governing body did not just hand out penalties. It defended a system that punished 5 drivers, from 4 different teams, by margins so tiny they almost sound impossible. Lewis Hamilton, Oscar Piastri, George Russell, Franco Colapinto, and Pierre Gasly were all caught in the same pit lane storm. And Gasly was punished twice. Some readings were around 1/10 of a kilometer per hour over the limit. Gasly's were reported as low as 0.04. That is not reckless speed. That is not a driver flying through a dangerous pit lane. That is a microscopic number that cost Russell a possible podium, erased Gasly's Monaco podium, and triggered Alpine to physically measure the pit lane after the race. But here is the part that makes this explode. The FIA said the measurement system had no irregularities. And that might be the biggest problem of all. Because if the system worked, and the result still felt wrong, then Monaco did not expose careless drivers. It exposed a rulebook trap. A legal racing line may have created an illegal reading. And now Russell, as both a Mercedes driver and a driver's representative, is pushing the question the FIA cannot ignore. Were the drivers breaking the rules? Or did the rules break the race? Subscribe to the channel. Monaco is the race that makes Formula 1 look like luxury from the outside, and pure punishment from the inside. The world sees the harbor, the yachts, the balconies, the history, the cameras, the noise, the prestige. The driver sees walls. Not far away. Not forgiving. Not waiting politely in the background. Right there. Close enough to punish a steering correction that arrives half a second too late. Close enough to turn one tiny mistake into a retirement. Close enough to make even the bravest driver respect the circuit before he attacks it. That is why Monaco has always been different. At most circuits, speed is the story. At Monaco, control is the story. Control of the car. Control of the tires. Control of the brakes. Control of the nerves. Control of the timing. Control of the pit stop. Control of every decision that can gain or lose a position on a circuit where passing is almost impossible. And that is what makes this controversy so dangerous. Because after Monaco, the drivers were not only questioning the racing. They were questioning the control system itself. The pit lane speed limit at Monaco is 60 km per hour. It is stricter than many other circuits because the pit lane is narrow, crowded, and dangerous. Mechanics are close to the cars. Officials are nearby. Equipment is packed into small spaces. One car arriving too fast could create a serious safety risk. So the rule is not the enemy. Nobody serious is arguing that drivers should be allowed to ignore the pit lane speed limit. The problem is much deeper than that. The problem is whether the rule was enforced in a way that understood Monaco. Because Monaco's pit lane is not normal. It is not a wide, clean, simple road where every car follows the exact same invisible path. It is tight, awkward, angled, and shaped by the city around it. Drivers enter under pressure, with walls nearby, radio messages coming in, traffic around them, and the race constantly changing. Before the Grand Prix even began, everyone already knew this area could be trouble. Race control warned teams that drivers should take a wider line when entering the pit lane, because the electronic timing loops could be triggered in a way that caused problems. That warning is important. It proves the risk was known. But it also creates a brutal question. If the risk was known before the race, why did the system still create 6 pit lane speeding sanctions during the race? That is the first crack in the story. Because warnings do not fix a flawed system. They only move the responsibility onto the driver. And at Monaco, telling a driver to simply take a wider line sounds easy until you remember where he is. He is not turning into an empty car park. He is entering one of the most demanding pit lanes in Formula 1. During a Grand Prix where every second matters, every radio message matters, and every tiny movement can shape the race. That is where George Russell's anger begins to make sense. Russell did not arrive in Monaco as just another driver hoping for a decent finish. He arrived as a Mercedes frontrunner under real championship pressure. Kimi Antonelli, his own teammate, had taken control of the season with a dominant run. Lewis Hamilton, now at Ferrari, was sitting ahead of Russell in the standings. Russell needed Monaco to stop the damage. He needed points. He needed stability. He needed a clean race. Instead, he became the symbol of the entire penalty chaos. Russell was one of 5 drivers caught by the pit lane speed system. His margin was around 1/10 of a kilometer per hour over the limit. That is almost nothing to the human eye. It is not the image of a car dangerously flying past mechanics. It is not a driver blasting through the pit lane with no respect for safety. It is microscopic. But in Formula 1, microscopic numbers can carry massive consequences. Russell received a 5-second penalty. And at Monaco, 5 seconds is not 5 seconds. It can be the difference between clean air and traffic, between a podium chance and a ruined afternoon, between staying in the championship conversation and watching the gap grow again. But Russell's sanction did not stop there. During the chaos of the race, his Mercedes stop became confused. The team failed to serve the 5-second penalty properly. Under the regulations, that created a new offense. The stewards handed him a drive-through penalty. At Monaco, a drive-through is brutal. The car enters the pit lane, crawls through at the restricted speed, and exits again without gaining tires, without repairing damage, without receiving any strategic benefit. It is pure loss. And because Monaco gives almost no overtaking chances, that loss becomes almost impossible to recover. Russell dropped from a possible podium position to 13th. 0 points. A race that should have protected his championship campaign became another blow to it. And that is why his reaction carried so much weight. He was not simply annoyed that he had been punished. He questioned why the original penalty existed at all. He said he was not entirely certain why he received it. He pointed to a possible software issue. He argued directly with the stewards during the red flag period, explaining that the punishment was wildly disproportionate to any possible gain. From his view, he may have gained a tenth of a second, but the drive-through cost him position after position after position. And the answer he received was simple. Rules are rules. That phrase is powerful. Because it sounds strong. It sounds clean. It sounds final. But after Monaco, it also sounded incomplete. Because the drivers were not only asking whether the rules were applied. They were asking whether the rules were good enough. That is the heart of Russell's revolt. He is not just a frustrated Mercedes driver. He is also a director of the Grand Prix Drivers Association, the body that represents the Formula One drivers in their dealings with the governing body. That changes the meaning of his anger. When Russell complains, it is personal. When Russell pushes as a driver's representative, it becomes political. And Monaco gave him a case that was almost impossible to ignore. 5 drivers. 4 teams. 6 pit lane speeding sanctions. Margins of 1/10 of a kilometer per hour, and in Gasly's case, even smaller. Lewis Hamilton was hit. Oscar Piastri was hit. Franco Colapinto was hit. Pierre Gasly was hit twice. Russell was hit, then punished again because the original penalty was not served correctly. That is not one driver failing to follow instructions. That is a pattern. And patterns are dangerous for the FIA, because they suggest the issue may not be inside one cockpit. It may be inside the method. The FIA uses electronic timing loops and official transponders to measure pit lane speed. The system calculates average speed by measuring how long a car takes to move between points. In theory, it is precise. In theory, it removes opinion. In theory, the number tells the truth. But Monaco challenged that theory. Because if a driver takes a slightly tighter path into the pit lane, the car may cover a slightly shorter physical distance between the timing loops. If the system uses a fixed reference distance, the calculation can show the car as slightly faster than it really was. The car can have the limiter on. The driver can be acting in good faith. The line can be legal. And the reading can still come out above the limit. That is why this became so explosive. The drivers were not claiming the speed limit should disappear. They were saying the measurement may not reflect what actually happened. And there is a big difference. If a driver speeds, punish him. If a driver obeys the limiter but gets punished because of geometry, then the rule has become a trap. That word matters. Trap. Because Formula One drivers accept danger. They accept pressure. They accept that the sport is harsh. But they do not accept hidden traps inside the rulebook, especially when those traps can destroy race results. And Pierre Gasly's result showed exactly how cruel that can be. Gasly drove Alpine to what looked like a Monaco podium. He crossed the line in 3rd. For Alpine, that would have been a defining result. For Gasly, it would have been one of those rare memories that makes years of frustration feel worth it. Then the penalties were applied. 2 5-second penalties. 10 seconds added. 3rd became 7th. The podium vanished. Gasly was devastated. He said there was almost nothing that could hurt him more. He spoke about working for years for moments like that. He said Alpine had done everything right. He felt the result had been taken away for unfair reasons. That emotion gave the technical dispute a human cost. Because this was not only about sensors and timing loops. It was about a driver losing a Monaco podium after believing he had earned it on the road. And Alpine did not just complain. They acted. The team filed a formal right of review. That means they had to bring a significant and relevant new element that was not available to the stewards at the time. It is not just disagreement. It is not just frustration. It requires evidence. And Alpine believed that evidence could be found in the pit lane itself. After the race, Alpine personnel physically measured sections of the Monaco pit lane. They were trying to understand whether the geometry of the entry could explain the difference between the FIA's timing loop readings and what the cars themselves were showing. That image is almost symbolic. A podium disappears, and the team goes back to measure the ground. Not to create drama. To find the truth. Because if the physical shape of the pit lane created the reading, then the controversy becomes much bigger than one penalty. It becomes systemic. And that is the word the governing body does not want attached to Monaco. Systemic means it can happen again. Systemic means it can affect any driver. Systemic means the problem is not a mistake in one garage, but a weakness in how the sport enforces one of its most important safety rules. That is why Hamilton's reaction mattered so much. Hamilton was not the driver most damaged by the sanctions. His penalty was served without destroying his result. He still came away with a strong race. But he still said he was not speeding. He said he had driven that pit lane for years. He said it was not like he had forgotten to press the button. He pointed toward the distance, and said the issue needed to be examined because many others had been penalized too. That gave the criticism credibility beyond Russell and Alpine. Because when a driver with Hamilton's experience says the system did not match what he felt in the car, people listen. Then Oscar Piastri echoed the same disbelief. He said the speeding penalties were very weird, because he knew for sure he was not speeding. Again, a driver's feeling is not automatic proof. But when multiple drivers from different teams describe the same disbelief, the question becomes impossible to avoid. What if the problem is not the drivers? What if the problem is the way the pit lane is being judged? That is where Monaco became a revolt. Not a revolt of drivers refusing to race. A revolt of trust. A group of drivers looking at the official system and saying, this does not reflect what happened. And the FIA's answer only deepened the tension. The governing body reviewed the timing equipment and found no irregularities. It said the system operated correctly. It upheld the penalties under the regulations as written. That sounds final. But it is not. Because a system can operate correctly and still produce an unfair result if the method is wrong for the situation. A ruler can be perfectly accurate, but if you measure the wrong line, the answer is still misleading. A clock can work perfectly, but if you start it at the wrong moment, the time is still wrong. A timing loop can function exactly as designed, and still fail to capture the real movement of a car through a strange pit entry. That is what the drivers are pushing against. Not just the machine. The assumption behind the machine. And that is why Russell's role matters so much. As a driver, he lost points. As a title contender, he lost momentum. As a Grand Prix Drivers Association director, he now has a reason to push for wider clarification. Because if Monaco's pit lane enforcement is allowed to stand without deeper review, the next question is obvious. What happens at Baku? What happens at Singapore? What happens at the next narrow street circuit where a legal line and a timing loop do not perfectly agree? The drivers cannot wait for the next disaster before demanding answers. Because next time, the penalty might not cost a podium at Monaco. It might decide a championship. And that is why this first block is not just context. It is the foundation of the entire story. Monaco did not create a small disagreement. It created a crisis of confidence. The drivers saw a rule designed for safety become a source of confusion. They saw microscopic margins become massive consequences. They saw the governing body defend the system because the equipment worked, while the paddock questioned whether the system understood the reality of the pit lane. And at the center of it stood Russell. Furious, damaged, and now positioned to turn his personal disaster into a collective challenge. Because if the FIA can say the system had no irregularities, while the drivers say the outcome was wrong, then the battle is no longer about one penalty. It is about who gets to define the truth in Formula One.